The MOU was a bombshell because there were no earlier indications of its conclusion. So when in 1st January it was signed, nobody was expecting it.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. In 1991, Somaliland declared independence from Somalia, but no country has yet to accept Somaliland's sovereignty. That, however, may soon change. On January 1st, Ethiopia and Somaliland entered into a Memorandum of Understanding that includes Somaliland leasing a coastline and port to landlocked Ethiopia. In return, Ethiopia would be the first country in the world to formally recognize Somaliland's independence. When news of the MOU came to light earlier this year, it sent big shockwaves throughout the Horn of Africa. Somaliland is in the north of Somalia, with a long coastline in the Gulf of Aden and bordering Ethiopia and Djibouti. It has many of the trappings of a state, including its own currency and governing institutions. It is a multiparty democracy and far more stable and less violent than Somalia. Somalia, however, still claims Somaliland, and every country in the world formally considers Somaliland to be part of Somalia. This move by Ethiopia threatens to upend this consensus of the last 3 decades. Joining me from Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, is Guled Ahmed Jama, a lawyer and researcher. We kick off discussing Somaliland's unique history before having a long conversation about this Ethiopia deal and what comes next. I learned a lot from this conversation. I know you will as well. And what I love about this episode, and what I always kind of strive to do on Global Dispatches if you're a regular listener, is to feature expertise from the region we're discussing. And I'm so glad this episode came together, featuring my interview with Guled Ahmed Jama, a lawyer and researcher in Hargeisa, Somaliland. So, Guled, you are in Hargeisa, correct?
Yes, I'm in Hargeisa, yes.
Can you just situate that geographically for listeners who might not be aware of where it is and what is Hargeisa?
Hargeisa is the national capital of Somaliland, and Somaliland is geographically located in the Horn of Africa. It neighbors with Djibouti and Ethiopia, and it is facing the Gulf of Aden in the strategic location in terms of the sea, in the Red Sea.
So Somaliland is famous for being semi-autonomous from Somalia. Can you just explain that history? I know Somalia does not consider Somaliland to be independent, but I know many Somalilanders do. How did this kind of semi-autonomous status evolve and become where we are today?
The current situation of Somaliland goes back to the colonial era. When the Europeans came to colonize Africa, they divided communities. And what happened in the Somali community, who are located in the Horn of Africa, is that they were divided into 5 groups. One of them was Somaliland British Protectorate. Somaliland got independence from the British on 26 June 1960. And a few days later, Somaliland joined a union with Somalia, which was under Italian colony, to form the Somali Republic with the intention of uniting all the Somalis in the Horn of Africa. Basically, the Somali people, including those in Somaliland, in Somalia, were not happy how the colonial powers divided their community. The union took place on 1st July 1960. The Somali Republic was formed. Initially, it was a democratic government from 1960 to 1969. In the year 1969, the military took over power and committed serious crimes in the entire country of Somali Republic, but in particular in Somaliland. Heinous crimes were committed in Somaliland, and the government of Somalia collapsed in 1991. In that same year, Somaliland declared restoration of independence from Somalia.
So it was the context of the collapse of the Somali government in the early 1990s and 1991 that Somaliland saw the opportunity to formally declare independence from Somalia, which at the time didn't have a government.
Exactly, but in relation to the history that Somalilanders felt that they were not treated well in the Union and that they were subjected to crime. So it happened in that same year, May 1991. Well, that's when Somaliland declared independence.
And how has the development of the economy and political institutions in Somaliland differed from that of Somalia since 1991?
What happened in that year when the government of Somalia collapsed and Somaliland declared independence was series of initiatives to build peace and statehood. And that was successful, unlike what happened in Somalia. So indigenous traditional bottom approach of peace building was carried out in Somaliland, where the different communities and clans came together, discussed issues, and solved problems without any intervention from the outside, whether it's positive or negative. There were no peacekeeping missions in Somaliland. There were no major funding on the peace building processes. So peace came in to be established. State system came into existence. A constitution was adopted in 2001 and voted by the public in national referendum. And after that, after the constitution was approved in 2001, Somaliland started democratic process where politicians and leaders are elected by the people, including the president, the members of the House of Representatives, and the local councils, who are mayors and the local district councils. It looks like an acts like a state. It has all the attributes of a state. It has a parliament, it has judiciary, it has the executive, it issues its own passport to its citizens and national identity cards. It gives a visa to foreigners. It has its own currency. It has all the attributes of a state you could imagine when you come to Somaliland, and it insisted that it is no longer part of Somalia. But as you said in the beginning, that is not recognized by Somalia, but also it's not recognized by any other state in the world. So from the outside world, Somaliland is considered as part of Somalia. But when you come to Hargeisa and other places, Somaliland is practically.
This brings us to January 1st of this year. You mentioned earlier that no country recognizes the sovereignty of Somaliland, despite the fact that over the last 25 years or so, as you described, Somaliland has built up like the trappings of statehood. It built up its institutions, it has its own currency, its own government. But on January 1st this year, Ethiopia and Somaliland entered into a Memorandum of Understanding in which, broadly, Ethiopia pledged to eventually recognize the independence of Somaliland, and Somaliland is leasing Ethiopia parts of its coastline. Can you just explain what this MOU says to the best of your knowledge and to the best that we know?
The MOU itself is not public, but we can talk about what the leaders of Somaliland and Ethiopia have been saying about it. And I think the important part here is that Ethiopia is landlocked, so it needs access to sea. Currently, it uses Djibouti port, but Ethiopia is a huge country in terms of geography, population, and it is growth in economy. So it needs money, more ports to satisfy its economic needs. So it approached Somaliland for that purpose. Somaliland, on the other hand, needs recognition. As I explained earlier, it succeeded to have strong internal powers to regulate its territory, the territory it controls, but it has faced hindrances and barriers in engaging the outside world. So it wanted to also get more international engagement. Moreover, Somaliland would like also to access the Ethiopian economy because that's good for Somaliland's economy. It is such mutual needs this MOU came into existence. The controversy surrounding the MOU is the point where if Somaliland said Ethiopia will recognize Somaliland as an independent state. That is what made Somalia to have outcry and to reject it and to campaign against the deal because they see that elevating Somaliland as a recognized state by Ethiopia will open Somaliland a door to get more other recognitions from other states.
So why is Somalia so opposed to the international recognition of Somaliland? I mean, if the entities really are as separate as you describe, what is Somalia's big objection? They just don't want a big chunk of their country declared independent, I suppose?
Somalia's leaders are in the position that they wanted to negotiate with Somaliland to bring Somaliland back to the Union. So they haven't decided to let Somaliland go, and they wanted to keep Somaliland the status it is now until negotiations succeed to Union. So that is their position. But the position of Somaliland has been consistently taken is that it's no longer going back to the Union, that the Union is over and dead in 1991, and Somaliland has a right to be recognized. So this is a dispute, 30 years old dispute between Somaliland and Somalia that Ethiopia get involved with itself by signing the MOU with Somaliland. And it is not the first time Somalia made outcry against engagement Somaliland made with other states. For instance, a couple of years ago, Somaliland concluded several agreements with the United Arab Emirates related to granting concession agreement to UAE to run Berbera port, that's the main port of Somaliland, and the establishment of military base there. Somalia also made outcry and said that shouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, UAE and Somaliland proceeded, and the port is operated by the UAE. It is kind of a standard where Somalia rejects any engagement Somaliland makes with the outside world, and of course, Somaliland rejects that.
Part of the deal also includes Somaliland getting a stake in Ethiopian Airlines. Why was that included in the deal?
Giving Ethiopia access to port is a huge step. So Ethiopia is saying in exchange of that, we want to give Somaliland stakes in the airline because there's a monetary value. But I think that it sort of raises questions internally. There is a debate within Somaliland which is not heard because of the bigger controversy between Somalia and Ethiopia, which saying, okay, if we give Ethiopia access to the port, which is a very important step forward, what is Ethiopia giving us in exchange? And because the MOU is anti-public and we don't see that much transparency around that issues, internally there's ongoing debate about the subject matter, saying, okay, how much we should get from Ethiopia in order to give them a port. But also a question is, do we give Ethiopia a port in a sovereign way, that Ethiopia have a full powers on the area, or should we give Ethiopia access to the existing ports of Berbera?
I see. So we don't actually know if Ethiopia is given the port or if it's just leasing the port.
That is a controversy because the statements made by Ethiopia and those made by Somaliland contradict. Somaliland president said we gave Ethiopia only naval base and they're going to use the existing main port of Berbera. But the Ethiopian leaders regularly said no, they were given coastal area that they can build their own ports and naval base. So it seems that the discussion around the MOU itself is ongoing business that might be settled when Somaliland and Ethiopia conclude a written treaty or agreement.
But why is it that the MOU is secret?
I think that's wrong to my personal opinion because Somaliland is a democracy, so these kind of deals should be public. But one way or another, Somaliland and Ethiopia decided to keep it secret. But what government of Somaliland is saying is that, okay, this MOU is secret, but the actual agreement will be signed later, and that actual agreement will be public and will be submitted to the parliament for approval. So the government is saying this is simply MOU is non-binding kind of initial step forward, but the actual agreement will be tabled to the parliament and to the public in the near future.
Following that announcement of the MOU in January, you saw, as you described, objections from Somalia. How did other countries and governments in the region react to the potential of Ethiopia recognizing the sovereignty of Somaliland?
The MOU was a bombshell because there were no earlier indications of its conclusion. So when in 1st January it was signed, nobody was expecting it. So people reacted differently. Some of them reacted very negatively, like that of Somalia. But the neighboring countries, I think the most important one is Djibouti. Djibouti is a neighbor to both Somaliland and Ethiopia, but also Djibouti is the port gives Ethiopia access to import and export of goods. 95% of Ethiopian goods go through Djibouti. So Djibouti saw big MOU as a threat to its economic dominance in the region, and that public statements have been made by Djibouti in opposition to the deal. The other Horn of Africa states, of course, reacted differently. Kenya has been trying to convene negotiations between Ethiopia and Djibouti. They have been trying to settle things down, because one important thing could mention is that the region is already in trouble. When you see what's going on in Somalia, in Sudan, Ethiopia itself, nobody in the region wants this escalation of problems between Somalia and Ethiopia. So some of the neighboring countries in the Horn of Africa have been trying to de-escalate and urge the parties to sit together and solve the problem by themselves.
I mean, is there any possibility that this dispute between Ethiopia and Somalia turns into something more than a diplomatic dispute, that there's some sort of armed conflict? I don't see that, but is that like a concern in the region?
Somalia is saying so, but the fact is Somalia is too weak to engage militarily with Ethiopia. So
Yeah.
no, I don't think that is a possibility in any time soon. But I think what some partners of Somalia are worried about is that Somalia is already weak. So they don't want Somalia to engage, to become busy with the MOU so that Al-Shabaab becomes powerful. That's why Kenya tried to negotiate the offices, but it failed. Last month, Turkey tried, and Ethiopia and Somalia met in Ankara, not face to face, but through the Turkish foreign ministry, and they agreed to come back to Turkey on September this year. So there are ongoing efforts. Somalia is not happy with that, because the argument of Somaliland is that the MOU and the port have nothing to do with Somalia, and Ethiopia shouldn't be talking to Somalia about issues concerning the MOU.
So, what comes next in terms of the implementation of this MOU? And do you expect anytime soon Ethiopia to actually formally recognize the sovereignty of Somaliland?
The MOU is located within kind of geopolitical problems. Egypt, which is kind of enemy of Ethiopia, came to Mogadishu recently and concluded military agreement and said they support Somalia. Turkey also concluded a military pact with Somalia to protect the coasts of Somalia. So there are so many countries, so many others beyond the Horn of Africa who are involved in this issue. The issue of recognition is very important for Somaliland. The president and the cabinet members of Somaliland have said there will be no deal without recognition. So from the point of view of Hargeisa, deal means recognition.
In the coming weeks or months, what will you be looking towards that will suggest to you whether or not this MOU actually turns into a deal?
I think what we're going to look at the coming kind of weeks is what happens in September when Somalia and Ethiopia meet. That's one important thing we could look. And one factor we haven't mentioned in here is that Somaliland is going to presidential election in November this year. That has an influence on the processes going on in here. So the Somaliland president said he's ready to sign the actual agreement. He's waiting for Ethiopia. So what is apparent here is that it is up to Ethiopia to decide when it wants to sign a treaty or agreement with Somaliland. And it seems Ethiopia is trying to first de-escalate its issues with Somalia. And when that settles down, it might come back to Somaliland. It is an issue that's very complicated and very difficult to predict, taking into account not only the relations between the three states, but also that many other states in the Horn of Africa and beyond who are actively involved in the processes.
I wanted to ask you, actually, lastly, how those states beyond view this potential recognition of Somaliland by Ethiopia, in particular, the United States and Western powers. How are they approaching this question?
The United States and the Western powers' position has been that Somaliland and Somalia should negotiate and solve their issue, and that's their position. So they are not happy that Ethiopia wants to recognize it. They see it as a unilateral action that might undermine Somalia, and it is efforts to get peace again and to solve the money problems there. So the U.S. particularly not condemned it, but reiterated what it called the territorial integrity, the protection of the territorial integrity of Somalia. But there are so many other states in the world who are not that much engaged, that have no problem whether Somaliland gets recognized or not. And the allies of Ethiopia, of course, would like to support Ethiopia in the process. But what I see here is that I think neither Ethiopia nor Somaliland did inform the international community of their actions. So it came as a surprise to many, and that's why the reactions were not that much positive.
Well, Guled, thank you so much. I know it's getting late in Hargeisa right now. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.